Okay, good morning. My name is Chris Wilson. I am IE Platform Architect at Microsoft, here to talk to you about the past, present, and future of IE. I've actually been a browser guy for an extremely long time. This was when I first started in 1993. In fact, if you look really closely, it says NCSA on there. But I joined Microsoft in 1995. I've actually worked on every major version of IE since 2.0. I think I only did one check-in in 2.0, but and spent some time on the WPF team as well. I'm now platform architect, which means I don't actually do any coding work or anything, but I tell people what to do. So I wanted to talk for a little bit about what happened in the past, like where we started with IE7 in a way. In 2001, we'd been developing this IE platform progressively, starting with IE4. IE4, to me, was really a quantum leap forward just in terms of programmability and power in the web client platform. And 5.0 and 5.5 and 6.0 took that forward, really built the platform for Ajax as we think of it today. But the problem that we saw in about 2000, 2001, as we were winding down IE6, was that there really wasn't a whole lot of adoption of this platform. There weren't a lot of applications being built on it. There weren't a lot of people who were really making use of the power that was in there. And it was really hard to actually build those applications as well. There wasn't a lot of tooling around HTML and CSS and JavaScript as a coherent platform. And of course, the dot-com bubble was sort of bursting in there too, which meant people tended to be a little shy about investing huge amounts of resources in a new, somewhat untried platform. You actually did see a lot of powerful, like WebOS style things in that time frame, or at least in the 98, 99 time frame, but they kind of flopped because they didn't really have a strong business model. And finally, at Microsoft, we kind of looked at everything and said, we really need to focus on providing rich client APIs. And that's kind of where the WPF or Avalon project came up, was the idea that we really needed to leverage that power of the local machine and provide the APIs to allow developers to do that. And of course, in 2002 particularly, hacking started becoming really, really lucrative. Hackers weren't really in it anymore just to cause trouble. They were in it to get paid. And this meant there became a lot more hackers because people like to get paid. And we, as a company, or as a division at least, we focused on building better security into Windows, doing this security push to sort of reset our thinking internally about how we all thought of security as we built our project. We spent a tremendous amount of effort, of course, on Windows XP Service Pack 2, which please tell me none of you are still running Service Pack 1 if you're running Windows XP, because please just get Service Pack 2. And one of the things that I did want to mention is we did this version. I actually wasn't on the IE team at the time. We did this version of IE that doesn't really quite have a name even because we didn't market it as a separate product. The IE6 XP Service Pack 2 didn't even really get a new version, major version number or anything. But we spent a lot of effort on this as a company. The team really did a ton of features in it, but they were all security features. So nobody really thought of it as a new IE, and they think that we didn't do anything from 2001 when IE6 shipped to when IE7 shipped. So with all this going on, with all the focus on security and us off doing rich client platform work with WPF, we seemed like we weren't really paying attention to the web platform at all. And then, of course, in 2005, actually even before 2005, but in 2005, Jesse James Garrett put a name to this paradigm that people had started actually delivering content and applications on, this concept of Ajax. It's a really simple development pattern, fetching data over the web and updating your local client, and really just utilizing the local client as an interactive programming platform, not always doing a round trip to the server every time you want to do something new. And the big thing really is that this wasn't groundbreaking technology-wise, at least, from what we'd been delivering in IE4, 5, 6, et cetera, like for some number of years. It was a realization that you could actually use it. It was also that you started seeing other browsers capable of it. You could actually get it working on the Mac if you tried a little bit. And I think Ben Galbraith actually said this last year at the Jackson conference, and it's resonated with me a lot about what I think of as Web 2.0, because it's not a technology thing. It's caring about the quality of Web UI, caring about the experience that your users have. The second thing that was starting to happen, and is still actually happening, it's a little bit slower in some ways, is that there's a rebirth in the concept of a semantic web, lowercase s for those of you who care, but web content really describing its own meaning, describing information that allows you to reuse it. RSS is obviously one example of this. Microformats, just tagging in general, is actually examples of what I mean when I say semantic web. The reason this is cool is because it allows you to reuse the data. It allows you to mash up different data sources together because they describe themselves in some way that allows you to understand them in a way that you couldn't when they were just presentations on the web with no semantic information about what the content meant. So in short, in 2005, we really, kept hitting the button. We really started seeing a rebirth of web-based client-side applications. Not even web-based, but the standards-based web platform being used to deliver client-side applications. So, of course, we sort of woke up a little more and paid a little more attention to IE in particular. And in February of 2005, we actually announced, hey, we're actually going to build an IE7 and deliver it. We had, of course, been working on IE7 before that. And we delivered a beta in July. And actually, at MIX last year, we did our layout complete build. And we said, OK, we're done changing the layout engine. Please go fix your sites. Of course, we did a couple of layout fixes after that. But we actually did pretty well at being layout complete. And in October, we actually shipped IE7. So first major version in 5 years, slightly over 5 years. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we did in IE7, and then I'll get into why we did it and how we prioritized. When we started out to develop IE7, when we started out thinking about what we wanted to build, we really thought of it in terms of three things. First of all, borrowing on our experience from Service Pack 2, of course, we recognized that the most important thing to users was providing them a secure and trustworthy browsing experience, making sure that they felt safe when they browsed the web. And secondly, of course, building a great end-user experience. I mean, at this point, we were the only major browser that didn't have tab browsing. That's part of it. But giving them just an end-to-end experience where people do things differently today than they did 5 years ago. They interact with the web differently. A good example is search. Search had actually not been the biggest way that people interacted with the web 5 years ago. On the other hand, if you look at what they do today, there are a lot of people, I'm actually in the minority here, there are a lot of people who the first thing they do is type something into the search box or go to Google or go to Live or anywhere that can give them the search that they're familiar with. And finally, of course, we recognized we needed to do a bunch of work to update our web developer platform. So I'm going to quickly talk about each of these three. In secure and trustworthy browsing, we focused on three main parts there too. The first one was really putting the user in control, like making sure that the user actually had the ability to manage their own security and that they were informed about it. Part of this was just we had an add-on manager that we shipped in Service Pack 2. Few people really knew about it because we didn't publicize it very well. But also looking at the settings and actually forcibly warning the user if they've set their settings to something that isn't secure by default. One of the problems that we would see is people would use internet cafes and they'd walk up to a kiosk machine and they wouldn't even know what the network settings were set to. And the person before them might have enabled everything and not asked, not prompted, whatever, and you wouldn't even know. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. And then integrating with parental controls on Windows Vista, of course. Letting parents be able to manage their children's surfing habits, I guess. The second area that we attacked was protecting the user against web fraud. Obviously, the most The easiest and most obvious example of this is the work we did to integrate an anti-phishing service, award-winning anti-phishing service, actually. It's really, really best in class, and I'll show that in a minute, too. But also, in general, just kind of highlighting security in the user experience, making it a little bit clearer what the security stuff means to the average user. My mom is not going to understand a certificate chain, and if we ask her a question about it, she has no idea how to answer it, so we're trying to make that easier for the average user. And in keeping with that, actually providing extended validation certificates, giving a certificate that means a little bit more about who's at the other end. So I wanted to actually show a couple of these features really quickly. It's not going to be a huge, long demo, but so this is IE7, my version of IE7, which I think is actually pretty stock because I got a new laptop not that long ago. Pointed at a random web page, maybe not so random, but an average web page at least. And you notice that the address bar is just gray. There's nothing special about it. It basically just says, hey, I'm a web page. You don't know anything about me. I don't know anything about you. But if you go to a web page that's actually secured, that's on an SSL connection, it puts a lock icon in the address bar. You can actually click on this and get a little report about the certificate. It's a pretty basic report. It's intended to not be a page and a half of data that you can scroll through to understand what the certificate chain looks like. It's intended so that my mom can actually click on the lock and figure out, as it says here, should I trust this site? You can click on that, get more information about it. It's not the depth of information, although you can, of course, view the certificates and see all of that kind of data if you really want to. This is the same stuff we had in IE6 for the most part. But just putting it up into the address bar so that becomes the center of the user's experience. And with extended validation, we actually took that a little further. And there's a special type of certificate now called an EV certification. And this is something that we drove an industry initiative for during the IE7 timeframe with the other browser vendors and with the certificate authorities as well, to provide certificates that actually mean more about who's at the other end. When you go to a site that has an SSL certificate like this, you know that you have a secure connection between you and this other server somewhere. You don't actually know who's at the other end. You can view the certificate, and it can say things like that this is a, oops, wrong button. Come on. Wow, not responding. This is what I get for clicking on the certificate path. There we go. So it will say things like, this is the secure server authority and that sort of thing. But frankly, I can go to a certificate authority on the web, spend $20, and in 20 minutes I have a certificate that says I'm Microsoft, or at least says something that's sort of like I'm Microsoft, enough to confuse my mother about that. And the idea of an extended validation certificate is that PayPal, it's a US company. There's only one US company named PayPal. That information is in the address bar, and actually, if you wait for a few minutes, that scrolls across and you see who actually says that they're PayPal, identified by VeriSign. And if you click on this, it actually tells you where that company is. And when they give this certificate to PayPal, PayPal actually has to prove that they are, in fact, PayPal. There is a whole set of rules and regulations about how they can do that, who gets to provide extended validation certificates because of that. But the goal is that when you see a green address bar, it tells you something that's a little bit deeper than just, oh, this is a secure connection. And to go the other direction, of course, this is actually an email that I got, and thankfully our spam filter caught it, but I pulled it out anyways, just 2 days ago on Monday. And I get these all the time. I'm sure that you do too, because pretty much everyone does. And I actually do bank at Bank of America. And in fact, I'd actually checked my account from a new computer in the recent past. So all of this thing could be true. Don't really know. And, you know, I might just be a little unintelligent enough to click on that. And you'll notice it flipped to something that looked like the Bank of America site. and immediately took that away, and the address bar went red. It tells me this is a phishing website. If I click on the phishing website, it'll tell me, hey, this is bad. We recommend you not give your information here. You can, of course, continue on to the website, but we clearly tell you this is not recommended. This is intended to try to help reduce the occurrence of actual phishing on the web. And again, we kind of center this all in one place in the address bar, so the user has one place that they're interacting with all of their security information. The last thing that I wanted to very quickly show was insecure settings and what happens when you try to set up your settings so they're insecure. Let's say I go to some site and they say, oh, well, this is a special site. You need to go in and, let's say, let's download and enable unsigned ActiveX controls. Now, you notice right here, it actually tells you this is not secure. If you click on this, this is not secure. If I click on it, it actually looks kind of salmon colored on there, but it's actually sort of pinkish on my computer. It tells you not secure. It even tells you what category is not secure. In fact, I think if I scroll up, it actually lights up the ActiveX category even. And if I go ahead and say, that's okay, I know what I'm doing, we'll actually pop another dialog box that says, are you really sure? Because this is going to make you insecure. This is going to put you at risk. Windows Defender is actually telling me that I'm at risk additionally, but that's kind of yet another way to make sure that people know what they're doing. But you'll notice I now have a little bar underneath the tab strip that says, your current security settings put your computer at risk. This bar is always going to be there. There's no way to get rid of it, really, permanently. I can close it here, but then when I restart the browser, it actually is still there when I come back. So if you have a kiosk system and you enable all unsigned ActiveX controls, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do, it'll actually tell the next person who sits down at the kiosk system that you don't want to do that. Now, you can just click on this and say, fix the settings for me, and we'll automatically go through and reset them to the defaults. Or, of course, you can go back into the security settings, and we'll still light up what's wrong with it, and you can still clearly be told, hey, we recommend you disable these. And then, of course, all of the problems go away. Or all of our warning messages go away so that the user knows that they're doing the right thing. So our goal, again, one more thing. One more feature that I wanted to talk about with security was something we call protected mode. Now, when somebody does find a security exploit today, they actually don't use that, as I mentioned earlier. They don't use that just to cause trouble. They use it to install malicious software. They use it to install spyware. They use it to install search redirectors or a bunch of other executable code that people can get paid for installing on your computer. Like, there's a whole business model behind how you can get paid for installing software on people's computers. So what we did was we built this feature called protected mode on Windows Vista, built on Windows Vista features, that eliminates the silent install of spyware. So you can't actually get anything written to your hard drive in an interesting place, at least, without the user being informed of that, even if they've managed to find an executable. This doesn't prevent a security exploit from running Win32 code. They can still run Win32 code, but because of the way that IE is running, they can't actually write to the hard drive anymore. They can't write to the settings. They can't get the spyware installed on the system. And we do, of course, redirect those writes somewhere else, so they still work, and an add-on can still work. It can still write out to the hard drive, read in from it, but it's virtualized, so you can't actually tell that it's not writing to the start menu, for example. And again, like I said, this is built on the UAC in Windows Vista, so it can't actually work on Windows XP. If you think about how IE6 worked, IE6, it'll cache web content. You can change settings and store those to disk. You can download a picture into My Documents. You can install an ActiveX control, presuming you have administrative access. At any point here, even in the caching web content part, if you were able to exploit the machine, to get in and run Win32 code, you could install things. You could install malicious software. You could change the settings. You could install new ActiveX controls. But because there's nothing to prevent you, other than the admin rights, there's nothing to prevent you from installing something into the start menu if you have access enough to download a picture. Now, IE7, on the other hand, when Internet Explorer is running in protected mode on Windows Vista, in order to do settings and files and caching web content, the stuff we do constantly as you're running, you still have access to temporary Internet files. You can write whatever you want into the temporary Internet files. So if there's an exploit, it can write into temporary Internet files. It's just that those are effectively untrusted. We always say those are untrusted. If you go into temporary Internet files and try to run something directly out of there, it'll actually warn you that you might not want to do that because this is an untrusted area of the disk. But if you want to change settings, do drag and drop, save something to My Documents, we actually have to go through the integrity control and UIPI to do this. We have to go ask a different process to do that writing for us because we don't have the ability to write out to the disk in that way. Like, we don't have the rights to it, even as a normal user. We're running in least privileged mode, not your normal user privilege mode. And of course, if you want to install an ActiveX control, you need administrative rights. That's yet another process that has to broker that. So overall, our goal with our security feature was to inform the user and put them in control, protect them by default anyways, like even if they're uninformed, even if they don't know what to control, they're still protected because of things like anti-phishing, for example. And then provide a backstop at the back end that's going to make sure that even if there is an exploit, even if we haven't found every single buffer overrun bug, even though we're trying to do that at the same time, an exploit is sort of contained. It can't damage quite as much as it can today. So I'm very, very briefly going to talk about the user experience. Frankly, if you want to know more about the user experience, I'm happy to browse with you, looking over my shoulder for a while or something. But download it and try it, really. Yes, we did tab browsing, added OpenSearch. Print was actually an interesting one because this was killer. Like, we would get applause at conferences when we talked about our print work because we stopped chopping off the right-hand side of your receipts when you printed them from the web, which turns out that was a little annoying. Page zoom, international domain names with some spoof-proofing features. The one interesting thing that I do want to spend a little bit of time on is RSS. And other browsers have had RSS feed detection and that sort of thing for a while. It's not really a totally new technology, but the cool thing that we did with RSS was we didn't just provide feed discovery and a default feed view with neat features like word wheeling search, but we actually, and that's hard enough to make a good feature for someone like my mom, who, by the way, my mom is not a clueless computer person. She's not exactly an enthusiast either. She uses her computer to get a job done, not to play around and be like her son. But with RSS, we provided a platform for all of Windows, right? For any feed application on Windows. They can make use of a common feed list, of a storage system that stores all the RSS items, the parser, the synchronization engine that keeps the storage up to date, and then we provided APIs to that system in Win32 and the .NET framework, so any feed aggregator application, for example, any other application that wants access to RSS feeds can do that by using this common system. If you want to write an RSS aggregator for Windows today, you don't need to go write all this stuff because it's already there in Windows. And we also did some extensions to RSS that we contributed back with a Creative Commons license. So finally, I wanted to talk about the web developer platform and the work that we did there. When we started out working on IE7, and I actually joined the team specifically with the charter of tell us what to do for the web development platform, we did kind of a new thing for IE in my past experience. We actually listened to web developers and what they wanted. We didn't always totally do that. We usually were trying to do other things too. And we fixed tons of bugs. We fixed tons of problems and added the features that web developers were asking us for. This is one of the sites we used. We fixed all but one of their bugs. We fixed over 200 CSS and layout bugs alone. in IE7. And some of them are tiny, like 1 pixel dotted borders no longer render as dashed. Okay? There are some huge ones, though, like the overflow bug. We used to have it so that any element would automatically grow to be at least as large as its children. This made it really hard to build websites that would interoperably work across IE and Firefox and Safari and Opera. We also fixed inconsistencies with the spec, things that weren't bugs but that we didn't quite finish, like putting hover on all elements and allowing you to overlap select elements. Bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to read every feature on here. You can certainly look at the deck later if you're really interested. We added a number of features that were from the standards too, like fixed positioning support from CSS, min and max width and height support. Really the top tier of things that web developers were saying, we could build a much better site if you just added these features. And alpha channel and PNG images, that was a huge one for providing, it always gets some form of appreciation. And providing an interoperable JavaScript API for doing XML HTTP requests. This was an interesting one because we actually built XML HTTP request in 1998. And then the other browsers actually picked this up in that interim time between 2001 and 2005. And they implemented it, but of course not as an ActiveX control. And they had an API that looked just like ours, but was a direct JavaScript API rather than an ActiveX object. So we basically copied that back and made it interoperable across all the browsers. You can just do it one way. You don't have to copy our old ActiveX code. And then we did some work to improve the overall end-to-end programming experience, like wildly improved our JavaScript garbage collection performance, fixed a bunch of memory leaks, caching of compressed files, that sort of thing. Now, of course, we didn't get to everything even that we'd originally wanted to get done. We know we have tons more that we could do in CSS. Floating elements is still one that hangs out there. Has layout is actually kind of a red herring because it's not the problem isn't that things have layout. The problem is there are side effects to that sometimes. There are features like before and after that are commonly requested. Don't get worried if your favorite feature isn't on this list. We have a much more complete list. With scripting and object model, a bunch of things, particularly events. This is my personal favorite one. Events don't directly match the DOM spec. It can be kind of hard to write interoperably. A big one actually was XHTML support, or other new formats as well. And the one thing I'll say about that, because I took a real beating from some people on the web about this, we didn't do XHTML, meaning the MIME type application / XML plus XHTML, because we didn't want to do that until we could really get it right. Like if we do a half job at that, we actually create more problems than we're actually solving. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about how we set our priorities, what we pay attention to. And this is vaguely prioritized or in order. First, in IE7, we listened to our users. The users clearly said they wanted tabs. That was kind of obvious. Printing was actually an interesting one because we did the printing work in direct response to a user survey, where the user survey showed that tabs was number one. Printing, like improving the printing experience, was almost right behind it. Like it was far and away the number 2 feature. The number 3, I don't even remember what the number 3 ask was, because it was so much less important in the graph than printing was. And putting search in the UI and that sort of thing, simplifying the UI. We also listened to hackers. Well, okay, we don't really listen to hackers per se, but we do have to pay attention, and we do have to think of new and innovative ways to, make their life a lot harder at least. And of course, we listened to developers. Talked about that a little bit. They really said, you're making our lives difficult, please make them easier. Fix a bunch of these bugs, give us some new features. We continue to get a lot of feedback like that. So that's actually where I want to transition for a minute and talk about something else. Other than security, in the IE team, we really have one cardinal rule. We've actually had this rule, since IE4 at least. Don't break the web. And this gets change to mean different things to different people. But to us, it really does mean if we improve our standard support by default, if we change behavior, actually, to generalize a little bit, if we change behavior by default, we will break pages out there. My boss, the general manager of the IE team, Dean Hakamovich, actually said this in an IM conversation to me about a year and a half ago. He said that, I'm concerned that we're doing all this stuff and, we're breaking things for the right reasons, in effect, and all that users and developers are going to walk away with is, you broke stuff. To some degree, that's actually happened. Like, a lot of people, that's been their response to IE7. My website broke. Why did you break my website, Microsoft? And Dean actually forwards most of those emails to me and has me follow up on them. And I will say that most of the time I will go in and I will dig through the issue and I'll figure out what the problem is. And it will be a blog post somewhere from some random person and swearing at Microsoft, and usually really swearing at Microsoft. And I'll dig through all of their code, and in the end, I send them back a very nicely worded, polite email that says, do you realize that you actually were expecting us to be broken, and now that we're not, we don't look the same, and you're serving completely different content to all the other browsers than you are to us. Hey, cool. And actually, it's not really our problem, it's yours, because you're expecting us to be broken. If you expect us to be broken, then, well, we're not going to be able to move forward. But in general, the idea that compatibility is crucial to us. I actually said this kind of tongue-in-cheek, that compatibility is the root of all evil, just because it's certainly been the bane of my existence for many years. It is really challenging, though, for us to support standards. It's not challenging for us to support standards because we don't understand it, like we can't read the CSS 2.1 spec or something, or even that our code base is totally broken and incapable of supporting things. That's actually not true. The challenge is always that if we change anything, we will break somebody somewhere. And we can't do that. We can't break the web as it is today, even if the web today is kind of broken because it relies on our broken behavior. If you look at it from kind of an abstract perspective, the browser, not necessarily just IE, but any browser, and your site, that's the end user experience of the web. That's what my mom sees when she goes to your website. Right? She sees your website and her browser's interpretation of that, and she is still running IE. If a site's broken, the user doesn't really know who to blame, and sometimes they blame the site. They blame the site if it's the first time they ever went to the site, and the site just doesn't work. They tend to blame IE, though, if the site changes over time. If my mom installs a new version of IE and then goes to the site, a site that she uses all the time, and it's broken, I can tell you whose cell phone she was calling. And it's not the site owners. And this is a critical adoption factor. This is a critical deployment factor. We can have great standard support, and if nobody wants to install the browser because their sites break in place, we all have a problem. It's not actually just IE's problem, because we can't make life better for you either. We actually do have over 500 million users. I mean, this is a stunning number to me. I've said this on stage probably a dozen times by now. 500 million. Like, this is a significant portion of humanity, even the people who don't have computers. And it's scary to think that we can break or not break the web for that many people. So we really do believe enabling developers to use standards, to write standards-based sites, is critically important. Certainly for the long term of the web, it's critically important. We also believe we can't break my mom's banking site or any other site that she relies on. And I shouldn't say my mom because, I do love her, but there are 500 million other users. So we really have to balance this. And when I say balance, I don't mean we need to spend all of our time on site compatibility and none on standards compliance or the other way around. It's more, we need to come up with approaches that make both of these goals happen. So in IE7, who doesn't know what Quarks mode is? It's probably a better way to put it. Oh, that's awesome. So I don't have to describe it. So in IE7, Quarks mode really doesn't change. I mean, yes, there are some crashing bugs we fix and that sort of thing. But in standards mode, in strict mode, things do change. This was a great way in IE6 to protect us when we changed our interpretation of what floating meant to not break sites in the wild. It was great. The problem is that standards mode is actually increasingly popular. 5 years ago, nobody in the top 200 websites was using standards mode. 4 years ago, I think 1 out of the top 200 US websites was using standards mode. A lot of developers, of course, expect no behavior changes, and today, half of the top 200 websites are in standards mode. Half. So if we change behavior under standards mode even, and leave quirks mode alone, we're still changing the behavior of the browser for half of the web, if you extrapolate that. So this really means, unfortunately, that quirks mode and standards mode, that delineation isn't really enough anymore to protect users from us making up for our problems in the past. We can't actually tell, using that, really, if authors intended standards, if they really want standards behavior at any cost, and they're willing to take the hit if we change behavior to make it more standardized, and they're going to just immediately change, because that's really what we're asking them to do, or if they expect the behavior not to change. So you go and look at all the people that I had email conversations with in the course of shipping IE7, and they expected behavior not to change, even though it was wrong. They didn't know any better, perhaps. They weren't really informed about it, but they didn't expect their site to change behavior because users installed a new version of IE. Now, people argue both sides of this religiously. Feel free to argue it with me later. I actually believe in both sides of this one, unfortunately. This really, it ends up meaning in the future we're going to have to ask that people say, yes, please give me standards in IE as of such and such a date even, probably, because that I'm sure will change over time. I'm kind of hoping this problem goes away in the long, long term, but certainly for the next few years, it's not going anywhere. I don't know exactly what that'll look like. Could be a comment-based switch sort of like this, could not. Watch the IE blog if you're really interested. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it soon. Now, doing something like this, though, asking authors to explicitly say, yes, I want standards behavior, means that we don't have to worry about compatibility. The author actually said, no, give me the new stuff. Give me the right standards, not what you did in IE7 under standards mode. That means we can do things like breaking our compatibility with layout and CSS completely, even if we're doing it to follow the standard. We can change document object model APIs, which is something that we really can't do today at all. We can pass the event object to the handlers, for example. And we won't break any current pages, because the adoption of any such opt-in switch today is 0, because we haven't even come up with it yet. And of course, as new versions of HTML are standardized, like new doc types come up, that sort of thing. I'm actually co-chair of the HTML working group, so once we ship HTML5, or know what HTML5 is going to look like at least, we can automatically say, hey, this should be in standard, like super standards mode, whatever you want to call it. But overall, the point I want to make here for all of the web developers out there is that compatibility is really crucial to you in developing your applications, as well as for us in actually being able to deploy and get people to adopt our browser. This has to be an evolutionary step. If we just try to revolt and say, here's your new browser, it's now standards, we actually disrupt the entire ecosystem for you and for us, which doesn't actually make it better for anyone. In IE7, we had a ton of tools that help people fix up their pages and that sort of thing. There's more information about it on the IE blog, and that URL comes up later at the end of the deck too, so don't furiously scribble it. I'm not going to go through each of the tools. I'm happy to talk about them with you privately, though. One thing I did want to mention is testing with Internet Explorer. Frequently, I would guess, actually, that nearly every web developer in the room needs to test with multiple versions of IE. They need to test content and applications against different releases. They need to test against IE6, test against IE7. And unfortunately, it's not technically possible to have complete multiple IE versions side by side on a single Windows install. We really are a Windows component. We're actually a set of Windows components. And if you update all of them, you're updating it for the IE6 version as well. If you go and look, iExplore.exe is a tiny, tiny executable. It's like 150K or something, I think, today, and most of that is multi-language or something. There are hacks that sort of allow you to run them side by side, like an IE6 and IE7 side by side, but it's not complete. You're not running all of IE6 or all of IE7. They don't have separate registries and that sort of thing, separate settings. That means they're really fragile, and I can't really recommend them. So we looked at this a while ago and said, wow, we've got to fix this somehow. Longer term, we might be able to do something in IE itself, but shorter term, virtualization really has to be the answer. Well, it turns out Virtual PC, Microsoft Virtual PC for Windows, is actually free. So you can go and download it, put it on your machine, and have the ability to run virtual machines for free. So last year, we actually managed to work through all of the licensing problems, licensing challenges, I should say, to make it so that we could release a Windows XP and IE6 image. And Pete LePage in the front row here is the guy who had all the fun of working through that. And of course, we're going to release these images on a regular basis as we need to, but this allows you to, for free, go and download the image, download Virtual PC, and have side-by-side Windows installs on your system, which means you do have a complete IE6 and IE7. We actually updated the image for the first time about a month ago, and we also released an IE7 image. So if you want to run IE6 on your main machine and IE7 in a virtualized machine, you can do that. We actually had over 100,000 downloads of that 500 megabyte image. It's actually a little smaller now, I think. That's astonishing to me. That's a huge image, and that many people would care enough to do that, I think, is great. So in general, things you can do to help. Please, if you haven't already looked at IE7 in your websites, please do. It's kind of important. Participate in the IE blog. We actually do read the blog comments. It's an interesting way for us to get community feedback. I use the word interesting in sort of an odd way, I suppose. But send feature requests and bug reports to us. Put them in blog comments. Send them to me. My email's at the end of the deck. I want to very briefly talk about what's next for IE, what direction we're going to go, because I'm not actually going to show you a feature list, because I'm not allowed to, and we tend to get people to rely on it even if we cut features at the end, they get a little upset. It's clear we have a lot to do with the web developer platform, right? Across layout, we really do have to invest even more heavily in layout and CSS for interoperability, just for powerful presentational capabilities in general. We need to make our object model more interoperable with the other browsers to make it easier to write Ajax applications and allow more flexible programming patterns as well. There are some relatively small things we can do to make that happen. The concept of Ajax itself really needs more APIs that allow you to utilize the client side. Like, there's work in the standardization bodies to do local storage, to do a better security model for mashup so that you don't have to proxy on the server or play iframe tricks or that sort of thing. And of course, in general, I'll say the three pillars that we had for IE7, those carry forward. Like, we will continue to provide a world-class user experience. We'll continue to do great things there for average end users, for my mom's usage pattern. Actually should have her do a usability study. We'll continue to look at new things, too, new user paradigms that come up, like RSS and IE7 was a great example of where we looked at something and said, wow, that could be amazing if we applied it to 500 million people. Like, not just to the, let's call them technical elites who were using RSS at the time, but to everyone. And I mean, RSS is now part of my everyday life, when frankly, 3 years ago, it wasn't something that I did on a regular basis. And of course, as always, security is our #1 challenge. And with that, I think we have a few more minutes, although my time monitor went dead, but I think that we do. So I'm happy to take questions. There's a mic in the middle. Please go up to the mic, because otherwise they can't record anything. Yeah?
So I have a question about delivery cycles. I think one of the frustrations with IE6 was, for various reasons, I understand, there's this long cycle of, although there was Service Pack 2,
yep, not
a lot of fundamental changes. And I think a lot of us that grew up with the browser sort of got this expectation of, wow, every 2 years there's this cool new browser, does these cool new things. I'm not hearing is there a commitment from Microsoft to sort of have, or is it going to be like we're going to be tied to the operating system? Are you going to be out of band or what?
So I think at this point we're certainly, I don't foresee another time where we go 5 years without a major, well, I shouldn't say major, without an upgrade of the platform in the browser. Last year at MIX we were saying 12 to 18 months. Certainly 2-year time frame, I believe that we're going to be delivering about that. There's no exact date, clearly, as several of our product managers are sitting in the back, and I want to still have a job. But we certainly, I think it's a challenge for us because there are some people out there who really, they want us to upgrade the platform in service packs, not even service packs, in our monthly security updates even. And that makes it really hard because it makes a moving target for anybody developing web content. But clearly 5 years was a little bit off the long end of the spectrum. We won't be waiting 5 years again. And I think that your expectation of having a new browser platform every couple of years is definitely a valid one. That's really what we're shooting for.
Thanks.
We don't run your mom's home banking site, but we do run a credit union banking site. And
well, how do you know then? You should be using it.
Well, we could check
it was me that used Bank of America, not her. So anyhow.
We've had some recent regulations that require us to use multi-factor authentication, and the way that we've implemented this is with client certificates, which is pretty advanced. But it seems like in IE that's a dark, cobwebby corner of the browser. There's several error messages that sound like everybody's going to die if you say OK, and
and the scary thing is people still ignore those.
Yeah, right. Yeah, blow past would be one of the buttons. Yeah. But our biggest problem right now is the certificates expire after a year.
Yes.
And so when you renew a certificate, you have 2 certificates, and it gives you a choice as you can select which certificate to use. But it doesn't have any visual indication at all about which of the 2 certificates that have the same name is expired. That'd be better if you could actually tell which one was expired.
That would be good. Yes. Please come up afterwards and give me your card because I want to talk about that in a little more detail.
Cool. Also,
Thanks.
like to see data URLs.
What? Actually, just out of curiosity, why? I'm not against them. I was kind of surprised by them in a certain test, which will go unnamed, and I'm curious.
Bullets and backgrounds in CSS, very handy.
Okay.
Hi, another credit union. So, in terms of phishing URL recognition, I'm wondering what underlying service you might be using to pop up a little message for the novice user that says this URL is not recognized as one. Is it just you're relying on like a VeriSign digital certificate being issued by that company, or how are you getting around showing that, hey, this is maybe a known spam proxy URL or IP address?
Sure. So there's a whole white paper about what we do with anti-phishing and how it works on the web. Look in the IE blog, and there's a pointer to it. It's back probably 9 months or so now. Briefly, the way that the anti-phishing service works, and this is provided by a Microsoft team that manages the database. There are humans behind it, is the short version. And I didn't show a suspicious site, because actually, unless I go to one of the pre-canned demo sites, they're hard to find because they go away extremely quickly. It's actually pretty surprising that the phishing site that I showed, which is a real phishing site, hadn't already been taken off the net because they tend to go away quite quickly. But the short version is when it hits, there are a set of heuristics that look at the URL itself, and it doesn't look at whether it has a certificate attached or anything. It looks at the URL and sees if it thinks it may or may not be suspicious. And then if it is, it flags that as yellow. The user sees it as yellow. They still see the site. And then they can say, I don't think this is a phishing site, or I do think this is a phishing site. In the very beginning, we had a fair number of false positives. My favorite was when my boss's blog actually lit up as suspicious for a while. That was awesome. I actually reported it as a phishing site, but somebody caught it. At the end of the day, that goes back to humans, and humans go and evaluate it, figure out whether it's a phishing site or not. And there's a whole set of ways that you can, I'm blanking on the word, ways that you can discuss whether or not your site is actually a phishing site with that service. And the white paper talks about that. There's also a lot more information on it on the web. Other questions?
Just one question briefly, not about security but extensibility. I was just wondering if you had any plans with a future version of Internet Explorer to make it a bit easier for people to develop add-ons, extensions, just like it's very easy in Firefox to do new stuff, to make your browser do new stuff, and it's a lot harder with Internet Explorer.
So if we have any plans to do easier extensions or add-ons, make it easier for people to extend the browser. You know, that is an area that we've been looking at very closely. Actually, I've personally looked pretty heavily at the Firefox and Mozilla add-on story. There are a lot of things that are really powerful about it. There are a lot of things about it that kind of scare me about delivering that to 500 million users, and because because extensions actually can do nearly anything in Firefox. I think you'll certainly see something there from us. I can't really say what exactly that'll be. Other questions?
One of the problems with working with IE and the other browsers and stuff is just it's sort of a world of mystery and misinformation when you go around the web in terms of what's actually happening. One of the areas we ran into recently is things regarding possible corrupted browser caches with compressed images and you know, things like that. Is there a place or a plan to have like a site that really is kind of I mean, the blogs are nice, but you have to filter through a lot of stuff.
Yep.
A lot of stuff is publicity oriented. And something that was really directed to issues and truth coming from IE would really be nice.
So the best place that we've always had to sort of center that around is the IE Developer Center, which there's a pointer to it off of the blog. We're still working on adding a lot more, like the issue you bring up about working with a corrupted browser cache. That level of issue, we're still trying to get enough information about all of those things and capturing them in not exactly a white paper, but some form of usable data that isn't just a random blog post somewhere that talks about it, and centralize all of that information so that you can get to it in one place. But that is a good place to start. There is actually a lot of information there about issues like that, because it binds together with the knowledge base as well. So we see PSS reports go through there and that sort of thing, customer support requests. So I would start there. What we tend to do now is if we have someone on our team write up a nice blog post that actually talks about a technical issue in detail, it generally goes into the Developer Center as well, so it's indexed and you can find it a little more easily. Yeah?
You mentioned briefly that there's some work to be done in the tooling area, and I think we've seen some progress with like the developer toolbar. Are there any further plans for better tools, especially with regards to JavaScript debugging and that kind of stuff?
Tooling is certainly a huge area that needs a lot of investment. The web developer toolbar we're continuing to develop. You'll see a lot more features in that over the future. There's kind of multiple patterns of development, which is one of the challenges. Some people really like the idea of the web developer toolbar and Firebug and the things that you can use in conjunction with a bunch of other tools, and it's not an end-to-end experience. On the other hand, you can go and use Visual Studio and use Expression Web, and wow, Expression Web is a killer tool. I mean, it's great if you want the whole experience end-to-end like that. As I said, I think you'll continue to see us invest more heavily even in things like the web dev toolbar and that's sort of ancillary tool set, I guess. You'll also see things like I hate it when I blank on we have a not as powerful as Expression Web, but Thank you. Visual Web Developer Express, which is an authoring tool. I know, best name ever. An authoring tool that the developer division produces that you can actually download for free. And that's actually a really, I've actually used that as my kind of HTML development environment for a little while. And it's a handy tool if you don't want to shell out.
Chris,
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Chris, last year at MIX, you had mentioned IE's commitment around future support towards open standards, particular standards coming out of the W3C, and you had mentioned SVG. Has anything around that commitment and that statement you made changed?
Has anything around that changed? Nothing has changed that I'm going to announce. No. I mean, obviously, we have been ramping up our investment in, not just in producing, or in implementing, I should say, standards work internally, but in actually participating in the standards groups. And that's been kind of a challenge since I think I'm one of the few people on the IE team now who's had a long history of doing that. And training up a bunch of people to be able to participate usefully has been a challenge. But yeah. I mean, I don't have anything new to say is the short answer.
So, you're working very closely with the HTML5, people working on HTML5 and XHTML5. Where do you see that figuring in with the future of IE, and where do you see XHTML1 and 1.1 and 2.0 figuring into the future of IE?
A good question. So, as I mentioned before, I'm co-chairing the HTML working group, the new HTML working group. So the HTML working group's plan at this point is effectively, and wow, that's a whole lot of history to pack into one statement. I think that XHTML 1.0 and 1.1 and HTML5 effectively in the long term are the same thing. That's kind of hand-waving at there actually being a spec out there with XHTML 1.1 stamped on it, but that lineage is all the same thing, and HTML5 builds on that. Both the what working groups HTML5 today and the HTML5 that the HTML working group will eventually produce. I think XHTML2, and this is sort of a general statement that I think is shared by most of the browser vendors, is a different beast entirely, and it was targeted for a different set of things. It fits into kind of a different ecosystem even, and I don't think it's really applicable in the desktop browser space. I don't see the point of implementing it if the other browser vendors weren't really excited about it either. And I think that building one spec that we're all going to interoperate on and all going to participate in developing and maintaining is really a lot more interesting, and that is what we're trying to do in the HTML working group. And that's far and away a big enough challenge, frankly, as co-chair. Oh, stop clapping, Molly. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much. Please fill out evaluations. Thanks.